Good morning once again. Welcome to ETAuto Virtual Electric Vehicle Conclave. Hope you are enjoying the session since morning. This is the first panel discussion of the day and probably the most pertinent subject that we are raising. Can India build an ecosystem which is self-reliant for electric vehicles? So to understand if we have potential to build that ecosystem in India, we have brought in top leaders from the industry across from design and development to the technology support provider to the electric vehicle manufacturer to the component supplier. So let me introduce to you today's distinguished panel for this session. Mr. Mahesh Babu, you all know him. He is the Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director at Mahindra Electric. We also have Mr. Arvind Goel, who is Managing Director and CEO at Tata Auto Component. Tata Auto Component has been putting a lot of effort to provide that supply, at least in the EV ecosystem. We have Mr. Anil Yadav, who is Head Business Development and Strategy at Vitesco Technology, which is a part of Continental AG, a German auto components giant. We are also joined by Mr. Rafiq Somani, who is Area Vice President for India and South Asia Pacific region, ANSYS Inc. ANSYS is one of the biggest technology suppliers. We are also joined by Mr. Gautam Dutta, Senior Director Marketing at Siemens Digital Industries. Siemens is also one of the largest simulation and technology providers to the automotive industry. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining ETAuto. But before we get into the discussion, let me give you some facts and figure. Where are we standing today? If you talk about automotive industry, it is over $120 billion industry that we are into. That's why we have to talk about the local or self-reliant industry, and it implies over 35 million people and contributes over 7% to the GDP. If you talk about the component right now, we are a net importing country. If you talk about ICE engine, I'm talking about ICE and electric vehicle put together right now, because the electric vehicles contribution to the entire mobility or automobile sector is still very minimal. We'll talk about how we can progress in this direction. We import about $17 billion of auto component, while we export about $15 billion. The total size of auto component industry is at $57 billion, which includes aftermarket also. In such a scenario where we see in ICE engine space, we have not been able to become completely self-reliant. A huge number of manufacturers are still dependent on joint ventures, technical alliance with their foreign partners. How do we think a new technology, that is new mobility that is going to come, which is electric vehicle, how are we poised or positioned to become self-reliant? I'll come to you, Mahesh, first, because you are doing it for a long time. You have been one of the pioneers in electric vehicle space. How do you see that? Do you think India has an advantage when it comes to electric vehicle to be a self-reliant?
Thanks, Nabeel. As you rightly said, the context, auto industry is one of the key industry in manufacturing, which contributes to significantly to India's GDP. And when there is a disruption, there is always an opportunity. So EV, I see as a disruption to auto industry. And in fact, COVID has given a substantial disruption to all of these industries. So every opportunity, I believe, should be utilized, particularly when you have a disruption. If you look at EV industry, as rightly said, is less than 1% of total auto industry. So it is at a very nascent stage. Many of us know that electric mobility is one of the energy efficient way of transporting people or goods or whatever you can call us. So the importance is the basic fundamental is there. And in EV, 50%, I would say the knowledge is software, because the EV vehicle runs on software. If we take India as an IT capital with so many IT professionals, and most of the auto industries are part of the Indian ecosystem in India today, the big threes and many more, all of us are now knowing automobile, all of us are now knowing information technology in India. And if we integrate them together, with the base technology of motor, power electronics, and battery management systems, I think there is a very high chance that India will play a significant role in electric mobility going forward. Fossil fuel auto industry is a 100-year-old industry. I'm sure when 100 years back when India was there, India was looking at most of the imports. And today, as you rightly said, the auto component industry is still a net importer. It's mainly because most of the technologies are introduced in the West and in the, let's say, in the East, and then India will adapt it after 5 years. There is a regulatory lag in either safety, in emission, and so on in India in automobile. And now what happens? EV industry sets a clear plate of new level playing field for Indian automakers, global automakers, and everyone. Because I believe the motor technology run by a software today at a very initial stages. And if we start now, the aim is in 10 years time and 20 years time, we need to play a role, because we should not see this industry as a small period, like 3 years, 2 years, 1 year. We should look at investments for 10 years. We should look at investment for 20 years, because this is going to be a huge industry. There are many studies says there is going to be a $60 billion worth of power EV components industry alone by 2040. So it's going to be start. Now, what we are doing at very early stages, I can tell you that, for example, our Trio, which is from April, we have almost localized everything except the cell. You all know that cell manufacturing is very, very capital intensive, and India as a government with ETAuto is working hard to get a 50 gigawatt hour plant. And we'll be happy that if that plant comes, because today, whatever we assemble in our Trio, including motor controller, power electronics, everything is made in India. And not only that, I also want to tell you that we are making high performance vehicle control units, powertrain at our new Chakan plant, and we have plans by end of the year to export to Korea, to our Sangyong and many other partners. Even if we have recently won order from a European customer. So we see this as not just a vehicle play. There is a huge technology-based integration of electric components, electrification, along with the electric vehicle play in this segment. I think India is starting well. And I would say the journey is going to be like a marathon. It's not a 100-meter race, and hence we have to prepare ourselves with all partners who are in this panel to work together and collaborate and see India as a brand in electric vehicle across the globe, rather than looking at individual brands right now.
What I decipher from your point is that we have to leverage the advantage that we have in software, and we should not just focus on local market. We should also try to tap the global opportunity that is coming up. Anil, you are representing a German auto component giant. Mostly Indian component makers are taking solutions or are technical partner of German or Japanese companies. How do you assess the India's ability to be self-reliant? And when we talk about self-reliant, how do you define self-reliance? Do you think the companies which are owned by Indian or Indian entrepreneurs should be considered, or should be those companies only should be considered self-reliant? Or you think companies like yourself, which come and set up shops here and they are supplying local, producing local, do you think that is also part of the self-reliant ecosystem that we are talking about?
Thanks, Nabeel. First of all, thank you very much for giving us, Conti and Vitesco, a chance to share our view. For us, globally, I would say we are into electrification field for now more than a decade. Yeah, there are more than, I would say, close to 500,000 cars running with our systems across the world, and we cover the complete aspect from a micro to mild to the plug-in to a full battery electric vehicle. So we have the complete spectrum. Coming back to India, I think when we talk about electrification, it is very important that we define what is under the scope of electrification, because the electrification market in India is not like what we see in the other part of the world. I mean, okay, in China as well, it started with the two-wheeler, but now China is known as the EV capital of the world, mainly from the passenger vehicles and the commercial vehicle as well, where the Europe and NAFTA have a completely different scope. From our perspective, and I think this is more of a personal view of mine, and I think I shared it in one of the last ETAuto Conclave as well. For me, electrification in India, it has a route through shared mobility. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, affordability or the TCO remains still a challenge when it comes to electrified vehicle. And the utilization rate is a key thing. And I think Mahesh just mentioned, I mean, if you look from the development of the traditional automotive industry coming from the internal combustion engine, it took India a couple of years before we started to see the anti-lock braking system or the electronic engine management system. Earlier, all these things were coming important. Part of the reason was that unless until there is a regulatory push, you don't see the volume coming up. Yeah, and as soon as those regulations become, implemented, immediately all the suppliers, including Conti and Vitesco, we have to follow suit. Of course, when it comes to safe and efficient powertrain technology, I mean, I'm very proud to say that we are fully localized in India. And for us, it's all about when and what is the intention. I mean, clearly, if you look around the world, I mean, let's talk about China or now recently Europe. I mean, even the stimulus package that has been announced, whether it is China or Europe, it has very strong green strings attached to it. Yeah. And we see this as a very positive move because, you know, there has always been a tendency, because I see value chain per se is now more profitable, I would say. So there are always tendency to use these kind of crisis to step back and go back to what we used to do. But luckily, at least in China and Europe, we are not seeing that. Hopefully, the Indian government also look around what is being offered and use this crisis as a reason to push forward. Because I think public perception or acceptance is also another thing. People have seen that, you know, what is the effect of the vehicular pollution. When the India was in lockdown, I mean, I saw the pictures that, you know, from Amritsar or from Jalandhar, you can see the mountains that people have not seen in last 50, 60 years. So I think there is an acceptance level. We need little bit of government push on this area. And again, we need to electrify the entire spectrum from two-wheeler to three-wheeler to the PV. And again, I would say the shared mobility or the last mile connectivity has to be an area where you don't have to start with really the high voltage. I mean, you can start with 48 volts. You can talk about battery swapping. So all those things will take care of the challenges that you foresee in a passenger vehicle. And I think it has to, industry, the government, and institutes all have to work together to make sure that we are covering all the aspects of it.
You're saying gradual progress we have to make. Before I go to Mr. Goel, I'll bring in the technology guys. If somebody is trying to improve in terms of R&D or trying to develop their own local product, they are the people where they go. Gautam, do you see any change in terms of mindset, in terms of, intention to spend on developing their in-house technology or product? And you are the people who are probably the first guy to be approached, or you are the people who support in this. So how do you assess the situation?
Thank you, Nabeel, for giving the opportunity, and thank you all the eminent fellow panelists. Yes, so I do think we have an important role to play for our nation's bid to become a strong EV player. But I would like to highlight and break this large question down to 2 or 3 small ones so that I can respond to the pieces. We, of course, require 3 things: design and R&D, supply chain for ensuring that we have the suppliers who have to promote themselves to be able to make these very sophisticated, complex subsystems, which are different from the ICE that we are used to. And the third area is, of course, the OEMs who would have to produce and manufacture. So I'll take the first one first. In this whole journey, the design is the first one. Now, there are two very important aspects which are trending in the world, and I would like to bring those trends back, because I don't think we will be any different from the others who have preceded us in this journey, and they have already faced these challenges, and they're on the way of solving them. One is to deliver a lightweight, emission-friendly, fuel-efficient vehicle. In case of EV, it will become all the more important because it's very simple. The lighter it is, the longer it will run for the same size of battery, whatever we chose and whatever we select as a combination. Yet, when we do this, we have to manage the expected vehicle performance. So there is a bit of a constraint here between the two of these tug of war. And the second area is to manage the complexity that we require for mechatronic systems that would go in, and all the other integration between battery, the propulsion, and the inverter technology that has to be between them. That is constrained with the guarantee that the quality of integration is absolutely superlative. So if you bring these pieces together, what simple answer that is, but a complex one to execute, is to run many experiments. It is already a known fact that the kind of regulations we have for EV, we cannot test everything on the field, because there are some 8 billion kind of codes to be tested, which is not possible to be tested. And that means the only way to do it is you got to simulate in a planned manner and run these continuous experimentation of specification, requirement, simulation, and I would not like to miss very important test, which is essentially the physical test to confirm simulation, and the closed loop of this verification cycle. That's one. Second is, I think Mr. Babu mentioned the play of software in this business, which has to go hand in hand with the very sophisticated subsystems that we would be running in EV. That means for a product developer, he has to develop systems to do the traditional design of engineering and the new development of software go hand in hand. Something which we have not done in the past, because software is usually developed by IT companies and designs are developed by the engineering companies, and the processes are totally different. But we got to sync them up, because for every subsystem testing, you would need software. For every version of improvement, you need the upgraded version of the software. This is a brand new collaboration between two totally different sciences. I mean, those who understand this, Mr. Babu would agree that for engineering, it is gate, state, process of product development in vehicle. In case of software, it is more agile. And two systems are totally different way of development. So these two have to synchronize. I would say, to give a simple answer, if they need to set up, all the developers need to set up these platforms so that then they can, work with, how do I say, a strong decision support system. No more our gut feel or opinions will work. It has to be a database decision. It has to be a constant experimentation. Thank you, Nabeel.
Right, Gautam, you have rightly pointed that the software and the hardware has to come together. If you look at the projections, the hardware, which the market is around $2,400 billion, is expected to become $28 billion by 2030. But if you look at the software, which is about $300 billion market in automotive industry globally, that is going to jump to $1,500 billion by 2030. So that talks about the change that is going to happen, and India can definitely, as Mahesh just mentioned, that is going to win over there. I'll come back to you, Rafiq, once again, and understand from you, how do you see the self-reliant quotient in Indian automotive ecosystem developing, or when it comes to electric vehicle, which is completely new, it also gives some kind of advantage because it brings everybody on an equal pedestal. The traditional mega companies have to start from the same place from where the new challenger or new age companies are going to be. So
Yeah.
do you see some sweet spot there for India? How do you assess the situation?
Yes, so first of all, thank you very much, Nabil, for this opportunity and pleasure to be part of this panel discussion with August people. I think, as you rightly said, and as my some of the colleagues already mentioned, India has a great opportunity. I think we missed the mobile bus, we missed the solar bus, but I think we cannot miss the EV bus because we have, in a way, all the right uh, ecosystem, all the right players, all the right talent. And let me go, one by one. So first to mention as what Gautam and Babu already mentioned, India already is a software and a simulation capital. And if you look at all the EV and ADAS work currently happening with, be it Bosch, Mercedes-Benz, General Motors, Active, Continental, Cummins, and I can go on Delphi and Valeo, all of them have their back-end captive centers in India. And the Indian engineers are working on this. So I think that's point number one. Point number two is, I think in terms of engineering talent, as Mr. Nitin Gadkari also mentioned, that we need to work closely, work with the industry and academia very, very closely. So I think we have the talent pool also. And I think in the software industry, we have proven that. The main point, the third point, which I think the EV industry has to look into to become self-reliant, is we have to a little bit transformative. And what I mean by transformative is we'll have to break this mindset of developing EV like IC passenger car or IC engine mindset. What I mean by that, in the traditional 100-year-old of IC engine technology, we were looking into design, analysis, verification, validation, testing as loosely connected. And as you rightly mentioned, the hardware and the loop and the technology was never integrated together. But if you look at all the great EV projects in the world, including something which we are working closely with VW or Bosch or Lucid Motors, they have come with a very small, dedicated virtual team, and they have been able to break this mindset of not working sequentially, but all together as one team in a system simulation environment, or what the CAD PLM industry calls about this model-based system engineering approach, and not waiting for that physical prototype to happen. Simulation technologies help you to kind of do all the, batteries, cell analysis, chemistry analysis, heat, thermal, power, electronics, and you can go on all the pillars of the electric vehicle. Each and every pillar, the simulation technologies, work together. I feel the India needs to have a transformative approach. They need not look at this, opportunity for India as an IC way of looking at it, and go into more, as I said, transformative way through model-based system engineering. And I'll happy to give more example and details as we speak later.
Thank you, Rafiq. I'll come to you, Arvind ji. Now you have a huge task. Number one, just now we saw Rafiq mention some of the leading component manufacturer. Unfortunately, we did not find mention of a single Indian auto component players. Why is that when we talk about technology, we somehow don't have that, names there in the list when it comes to Indian manufacturer, like Tata Auto Component or anybody, Rico Auto, Mindas, and all those of the world. We always end up talking about Delphi's, Bosch's, Conti's, those kind. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but why is it that Indian auto component manufacturers are not able to match the need that is there in terms of technology and R&D? Uh, were we too dependent on the technical alliances and joint ventures, That also shows the business. I think over 55% of the business in India, an auto component space is, owned by, or more than 60% controlled by joint ventures or the foreign companies. So how do you put yourself, or what are you going to do to change this scenario?
Yes, certainly the way India has gone on to the EV has been on a very incremental path. And other than Mahindra and Mahindra, who has put money on the table to develop EV, and to some extent Tata Motors, I don't think anybody else has put money on table to develop. See, what we always compare that how China got developed. China started almost in 2007, 2008, and the government of China saw to it that the local investments are made, huge support to the local industry onto the R&D benefits and the tax benefits, and so many benefits were given to the local industry so that they are able to put in money and develop the whole ecosystem. In India, the Indian auto component industry, if you look at, there is no specific incentive which you get to develop. You have to also look at when Conti or Bosch is developing, they are looking at a world as a market, and they have setups all over the world. They have market penetration all over the world, and the costs can easily be distributed over a certain volume. And if the Indian auto component industry has to really develop so much of the technology on their own, there is a huge amount of the government support would be required. Otherwise, everybody will still land up in getting the technological licenses from various parts of the world, and then start with uh, an incremental growth by doing some assembly and importing the parts and slowly localizing the same. So, as you already said, that Indian auto industry is a net importer, in spite of the IC engine and the whole has been there for many years, and only new norms or the notifications which come from government, you have to do incremental development for which they go out to get technology. But in the case of electric mobility, if you look at if you have to localize everything, you have to look at the whole value chain and whole ecosystem per se. And also one has to look at a collaborative effort between the Indian OEMs. The international OEMs have a very different thought process, they're different market, deep pockets to handle. So if the Indian OEMs have to work, they should have a collaborative approach to see that they all work together. And some capex, for example, is put by Mahindra and some capex by Tatas, and they utilize each other's facility to reduce the total investments into the place. So today, if you look at except Mahindra, no one in India is really producing anything. They're all buying from outside. Mahindra at least has making the motors and the power electronics inside, and also doing the battery assembly. But the key modules, the lithium ion cells and the modules are the key cost to the whole battery pack, which really comes from either from China or from Korea. So if you have to localize this and to look at the whole ecosystem, a lot of collaborative effort between the industries required to be done. And for the first time within Tata Group, also a full ecosystem is working. Like Tata Motors is investing in some places, Tata Auto Component is doing in components like battery pack and motors and power electronics, and even localizing the charging stations. Tata Power is going into the charging stations and platforms itself. TCS is doing a lot of work on the software development, and Chroma is going to do a virtual selling of the e-mobility vehicles. And certainly, if the industry come together and work as a nation building effort, and share each other's knowledge, each other's capex, then only the Indian industry can really come up in a big way. And if a lot of more engineering has to be done, fortunately India has good resources, good engineers, but the cost of the investments here are extremely high. and the government has to create an ecosystem to ensure that they also give a big support. Only when there is some war type of thing happening with China, then everybody says, we should not import from China and localize as a knee-jerk reactions. So as a long-term thinking and to see that there is a good potential which is harvested. China never has any name in the auto industry. They never had. But on an electric mobility, they decided almost 13, 14 years back and created a system of support. And now they are creating a system of support for hydrogen fuel cell. We will in India talk about hydrogen fuel cell maybe 8, 9 years down the line, even though Tata Motors has made some 7 or 8 hydrogen fuel cell buses. But the whole...
And we also did something like we jumped from BS4 to BS6. We never know, somebody might be... Is it a good time for people to start thinking of fuel cell right now in India?
I don't think it's the right time to think about fuel cell. What I'm trying to say, whichever technology we want to adopt, you have to start thinking about it 8 or 10 years in advance. You can't start that, okay, in 2 years I want to go into electric vehicle and I want to localize. Then what happens? You start importing the technology from outside, start importing the components. So everything has a timeline, and support from the government to the industry.
Thank you, Mr. Goel. Because in the interest of time, I would request every speaker to be a bit precise so that we can take more questions and everybody gets equal opportunity to answer them. I'll come to you, Anil. You have been working with a multinational company for a long time. When you look at Indian ecosystem, what are the missing links that you think India, be it academia or the industry or the government, needs to fill? We end up blaming the government all the time. Of course, we see that some of the measures taken by the government, especially in the R&D space, like the weighted deduction was completely taken away from 200%. But do you think that it is, looking at the socio-economic condition of India, how much the government can spend, how much the government can support? We have been getting support for decades right now. We are a socialist economy. In such a scenario, looking at these kind of elements, how do you assess the situation? What are the missing links that you think India needs to fill immediately to be a self-reliant?
I think we have example, and I think one of the panelists was mentioning earlier as well. It's not only about the support in terms of financial subsidies as well. Sometimes a regulatory push is also a mean to drive one particular technology. I mean, take an example of anti-lock braking systems or airbags in last 5-7 years. As soon as legislation pushed into the market, you started to see the volume, and immediately you see the entire value chain has been localized. Because at the end of the day, I think when it comes to the industries, they have to look into the profitability part of it as well. Yeah, I mean, and especially with for the electrification part, I think India has some very unique opportunities, and I can tell you, I have seen the transition of China. I moved to China in 2008, and at that point of time, China was one of the markets in automotive, and it has become the market in automotive. And clearly, there has been a consistent effort. I mean, it was basically started with financial subsidies, and later on, they made it a regulatory push, which has forced people to buy the vehicle. I mean, starting from Shanghai to Beijing's and Guangzhou's of the world. I mean, initial buying of electrified vehicle was not because people liked it, because the government really made it, first of all, you cannot buy it by the quota or anything. And even if you buy it, they make it really expensive for you to drive it. And that's how people started, I would say people have been initially forced into buying those vehicles. Same goes, I mean, taking those kind of example, India has to start from the other aspect, other end of the value chain. I mean, clearly two-wheelers and three-wheelers, and even, I mean, if you look into it, the shared mobility, we are not talking about big SUVs. If we start talking, replacing the the Wagon Rs and the Altos of the world in this area, it's easy. They run in the city. I mean, the top speed need not to be more than 100 kilometers per hour. I mean, I would say the range don't need to be 400 or 500 kilometers, because even if you are running the car for 20 hours or so, you can have chance to charge it in time. So clearly, this is how you have to build, how to say, the volume, so that the value chain started to establish. And I would see over here, the government's role is very simple. I mean, clearly look into the aspect in the certain areas of the city where you say, no, we will not allow the gas fueled vehicles, whether it is two-wheeler or three-wheeler. And I think this will be not so much pain. I would say, of course, any legislation, when you try to push it, there are some inconvenience, but that's how you push things to get started. And I think over the period of time, then as people started to see the volume coming, I'm pretty sure the money will follow.
Thank you, Anil. I'll come back to you, Mahesh. The ball is in your court now, because Mr. Goel also talked about, OEM needs to collaborate. So you are representing the OEMs also here. How the Indian OEMs can collaborate better with the auto component space to make them, self-reliant, or how can you be dependent on Indian component? Why are the OEMs shying away from relying or being completely dependent on Indian players? Number one. Number two, it's a huge battle. It's a big segment that is there in the electric vehicle space or any automobile space. How India can pick its battle. We can't go full volume everywhere. Which are the areas, segments, or sectors that India needs to adopt, or in the first phase, where the component manufacturer or the vehicle manufacturer should target initially to enhance its presence or its strength in electric mobility space, and why?
Okay. Nabeel, I agree with my panelists. Most of them have said the work. I think we'll have to look at a wide area of things when you talk about EV, because we are so much obsessed about the battery cell. We don't make cell, and that become an obsession. There is a huge 40 to 50% value addition in motors, motor controllers, power electronics, battery pack, cooling system, and many more, which we are good at, but we don't want to do it. I think it is important that that's what we have tapped on. For example, we work with everybody. In fact, we said that if Tata is going to come up with a cell, we'll be happy to go and buy from them, because it's about collaboration. It's not about a competition now. Somehow in the Indian ecosystem, suddenly, if EV comes, IC will die, or IC, or let's say the hydrogen fuel cell comes, EV will die. I think nothing will die. I think all of them will exist. We need to build each of these ecosystem to build in such a way that all of them survive, and each of them will be decided over a period of time by the customer, because you will have to give the choice to the customers over a period of time. And when we take the decision, we'll have to look at nation first, industry next, and maybe individuals later. If you look at that perspective, I think you will look at long-term collaborations, long-term investments, long-term profit, not this year's profit and next year's profit. That's what we'll have to look at, because we are going to build a ecosystem which we want to become self-reliant among ourselves. I think you alluded about what do you mean by self-reliant. Self-reliant is not about making everything for us only in India. I think it is a misconception. Self-reliant, I believe, is you have to collaborate. We collaborate with European design houses who help us in designing some of the hardwares. We collaborate with American suppliers. We collaborate with even Chinese suppliers. Today, we are collaborating with Korean and Japanese suppliers. The collaboration has to be international. But I think the IPR or the ownership of the design is yours. So you need to collaborate with everybody in the world. You have to use the global resources and create a unique proportion to our customers, which is valued not only in India, but also valued outside the country. Let's look at the three-wheeler story. India is very unique in three-wheeler. 85% of the global export three-wheeler is done from India. And India is whenever you see a three-wheeler across the world, it's kind of tuk-tuk of India. So if that is the story, why we are shying away from making it completely electric? Why we are shying away and making that investment around it and make it popular? Why can't all of us put energy towards and say what it can be done? If you look at Mahindra Trio, we have been propagating already that the customer earns 3 to 5,000 rupees a day extra just by economics. Nothing you need today's FAME subsidy, today's pricing and costing. If you run 100 kilometer, 120 kilometer a day, you will be able to take more money just by lower operating cost, and it saves fuel. It is more economical. We have seen women drivers, women empowerment coming, because now it is drive by wire. You are giving a technology which is in high-end cars to a three-wheeler, because you just drive by a throttle, which is a potentiometer, and you no more change gears. And it's a very, very comfortable way for women drivers getting into the one. So technology can be global, collaborators can be global, but you have to bring a unique Indian solution for India. And similarly, if you want to export, I said that we meet all the ISO 260 safety norms for our global export powertrains, meeting European standard, Korean standard, and all that. So you have to make technology competitive products in India across the globe. And you have to bring a local solution with your products to meet transformational change and societal change in the society. So that's where we have to play as OEM, and we are happy to collaborate. We are using simulation tools, we are using softwares, as rightly said by the panelists. It's about the mindset change of the industry to move from mechanical to mechatronics to software, and integrating all of them to get a reliable product out. And it is not rocket science. If we only collaborate, I think we can do that.
Thank you.
I would like to compliment what Babu said. Can I take?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, actually, Mr. Babu, very important points, and I think we are all getting obsessed with just the battery and lithium and all. But I think, as Mr. Babu said, if you look at the electrification and EV vehicles, we have to break down what are the four pillars of EV. It is the battery and the battery management system. And as Babu said, there is electric machine, that's the second pillar. There's power electronics, and then there's a power integration. So I think, we need to look at all the four things, and then we look at what is that first we will look at. And again, Mr. Babu said, which is very important, and I like that India need to come out with our unique solution. If you look at what is the EV challenges, and I don't agree with what one of my peer colleagues said, 8 to 10 years. I think that's why I said, it's a mindset change, transformative. And if we take an example of Volkswagen Motorsport, in 250 days, they decided that they will compete in Pikes Peak competition. And within 250 days, nobody had heard about Volkswagen as an EV motorsport company. But in 250 days, they made a product and they won the competition and broke the under 8 minute barrier. So for coming back to India, I think, as Babu said, we need to look at our sweet spot and the trade-off we need to do. What are the challenges we are looking at? The challenges in electrification we are looking is cost effectiveness, safety, performance, charging, and basically time to market. Now, here we can leverage technology in all these parameters and see, what is the product we can come out. So I think I would like to echo what Mr. Babu said earlier.
Thank you, Rafiq. And I think we are moving in almost right direction, because look at the proliferation of electric rickshaws. We have seen that in the last 4-5 years, we have seen almost 1 million e-rickshaws are there on the streets. Maybe many of them are powered by lead acid. But yes, we have made that move, and we are choosing our battle rightly, and we are recognizing the unique need of India. And we look at the three-wheeler space also. Mahesh is, supplying every year a good number of three-wheelers. We have a kinetic energy that is also working heavily in this space. So of course, we are seeing that the three-wheeler where we have been strongest contender, our electric vehicle is very fast moving there. Electrification is moving very fast in three-wheeler space. Gautam, I'll come back to you. We talked about timeline. Mr. Goel talked about that you need time gestation period to bring out a technology, right? But to me, as Rafiq was also saying, that time is no more important when people like you are there, Siemens technology or ANSYS kind of people are there. Market needs to be ready, but market can be made, by regulation or by other, forces, as Anil was also mentioning. Uh, do you see some kind of change from the stakeholders when it comes to electrification of fleet or bringing out electric product? How do you see them? And how can you convince them that time is not, a constraint? Technology players like you are there who can shorten. Can you give some examples also in this?
Sure. Sure. I think it's a very good question, Nabeel. And I think Rafiq set the stage of bringing in the argument of, multi-year project to, days-long project. And you rightly said, but there is a difference between the two, which I think is a critical success factor when we talk about India. And that is there are certain set of technology-based confidence which mindset we need to change. Let me make it structured, this answer. We are talking about accelerating decisions here. And that's the difference between the traditional 8 to 10 years development time reduced to 250 days. It's about accelerating decisions. Let's break that down. How do we get to accelerate decisions? Have you realized in last 45 minutes of our discussion, we have actually expanded our gamut of challenges from EV to supply chain to import substitution, to be able to develop all these pieces of development, to be able to change the government regulation. We are talking now a multi-aspect challenge to be able to make that one product and make it successful as a business and as a supply chain in India. So first, the foremost is realism. I think there are three pieces I would explain. One is realism. We have to increase the confidence of our decision making. I will not give the answer because giving an answer means another 1 hour of session. But ask for oneself, why is it that I'm taking 8 to 10 years? It is because I don't have confidence always in the decisions, and that happens at every level. And we have today technology which can help you develop that confidence, realistic confidence, not braveness out of brashness. Okay, first. Second, continuity. I think this was talked about by all the speakers. It's about the collaboration between all these pieces, right from the tier 5 to tier 3 to tier 1 to the OEM, the continuity. I think the modern growth mindset aspect speaks about collaboration against competition. It is not a time to compete. It is a time to collaborate. How do we continue our decision making across the supply chain is done. Again, technologies are available to ensure that collaboratively we can take realistic decisions, which gives us confidence. Last but not the least, we have to not to fear to explore. As a risk-averse society, we are very, very fearful of exploring new things. Exploration gives us insights. In engineering, it is extremely important that we develop insights while we take decisions. So 3 pieces: realism, continuity, exploration. In combination will give us the productivity, speed, and acceleration to make it happen fast. That's my answer to your question.
Very succinctly and perfectly put, Gautam. I'll come to you, Rafiq. I'll take a bit different aspect to it, Rafiq, and then you can club your comment on that. We see a large portion of auto component suppliers are still MSMEs, very small companies they are operating. For them to be to have R&D or to have self-reliant design and development becomes very difficult, because I spoke to many of them. They say the technology cost is very high. Rafiq, company like yourself, how are you thinking of a solution or options which could be, adopted at the MSME or the small company level? What would be your
Yeah,
advice to them?
Yeah, Nabil, good question. And first of all, because we are all the panelists are talking in unison, I would first like to compliment what my friend Gautam said. And actually, he's very true and correctly said. And just to give an example, like say, crash test for automotive, and Babu knows it, and Tata Motors knows it. Crash test is one of the most expensive thing we are doing. Now, there are technologies available in the market where you can do a crash test digitally and to a perfect level, and which is accepted by all the regulatory bodies. So one is that. The second one is like, again, making prototypes. We can talk about like examples like Lucid Motors. They did not make the last prototype till they had to make it to get their electric vehicle approved. Till then, that time they did not make a prototype. So I think, yes, the confidence, as what Gautam is saying, and the cost reduction, just trying to complement on giving some example for the audience. Coming back to Nabil, your question, I think, yeah, it's not just the auto OEM who can afford technologies like simulation technologies and other CAD PLMs. But I think it's important, like, how do we provide these kind of technologies to startup companies, academia, research institution, and to MSME and SMB companies. So I think players like us and many other in the industry, they have various kind of technology and packages available, and I can give you some examples. The one is we have something called as Starters Pack. A Starters Pack is for a startup company, and which is a lot of bundle package, mostly applicable to them, with some bit of training and hand-holding at a very, very minimum cost. So there is a startup package available. The second thing, the startup companies and the SME and the MSMEs can reduce their cost of ownership for such technology is today, cloud and HPC has become so much pervasive that SMB or MSME company need not buy a very, very expensive workstation to run expensive simulation technologies. There are companies who offer cloud and simulation as a service as per the way you use it. And I can quote many examples in India, Nabeel, and internationally, who are using and leveraging combination of that. And one thing which I would like, Nabeel, important aspect is how do we, vendors and OEMs and technology players like us can collaborate and academia. So if a SMB and MSME cannot, they can always go to top academia and research institute or IITs, and they will be very, very happy to do this project. So I think these are some 3 examples I just gave you. Starters Pack, cloud as a service, and working with research institutions and IIT is the best way. And our SMBs companies in India are doing good job and leveraging this facility.
Thank you, Rafiq. I'll come back to a very pertinent and a bit of touchy subject that we have partially touched upon during the discussion. Mr. Goel and Mr. Babu, I'd like to get your comments especially. We are talking about boycott China. We are talking about huge dependence on China when it comes to electronics. So we are talking about, we import heavily from China. How important is China for us? Can we do away completely China or anybody in the world? How do you see it?
Certainly, one can do away from import from China, but it's question of for how many years you will need to take. And certainly, if Volkswagen can develop something in 250 days, I don't think these electrical components and these electronics, you can do it in that period of time. Okay. And you need to first see and resource these parts from other countries. And it will be expensive, but it's fine as long as you want to get out of China. And then develop it into a larger volume game. If you want to buy electronic chips, you just can't put a factory for your own requirement. You have to put a factory for an international market. You have to put a factory for a much larger size of a business and also organize a huge supply chain to do that. So it is possible. It's a question of the whole system to be developed. There are a lot of work which Niti Udyog will have to work with CII or the industry body and the other ministries. And once we decide and put into a structure, step by step, this is certainly possible to be done. But a knee-jerk reaction to this is not going to work.
Mr. Babu, your take.
Okay. Yeah, I think what we should look at as a country, what we want to do. We should not again be obsessed with another country, what we will do as a knee-jerk reaction. First is we'll have to see what we need to do in the complete value chain of, let's say, EV. Forget EV. So many, when I was searching for so many electronic parts to be localized, while we make, let's say, motors, there are capacitors, resistors, IGBTs, all of them are imported. So what is the point in just doing motor controller here when all of them you are importing? Then we deep dive. Then we found Kerala Electronics, which is a government of Kerala company, which is making some super capacitors or capacitors to do it. But they never sent any catalog. They never had any marketing brochures, nor anybody knows what they are doing. So we'll have to look at, search very, very carefully what we need to do. And as Mr. Goel said, we'll have to look at, first is, I think right now, those technologies which we don't have IPR or don't have the technical knowledge, I think we should put a red carpet and welcome people who are knowledgeable in that to come and play in India. I think that's where we are lacking. I think government and industry and collaboration. While Nabeel, you say that 50% of the area we are collaborating in automobile, I think when we don't have, I think we must be open to collaborate from people who are knowing it right now to come and make in India. That creates an ecosystem. And the only thing is we should not stop there. And we should now build that ecosystem to from manufacturing to sub-supply chain and kind of manufacturing engineering, and then get into actual design and so on and so forth. So it needs a very concerted effort from government, industry, and maybe academia and what we are talking about. Many of the research work being done in India is not collaborative with industry. I think most of the country you go, I think there is a very strong industry, academia collaboration on research. And most of the academic research in India is nothing but repetitive of somebody would have done the same just to skill the engineers and skill the scholars rather than actually inventing something new. So we'll have to think about how this whole industry, academia, and government entity works to a concerted effort on a focused effort on bringing something over a period of time. Sorry, on bringing something may change. Maybe 5 years you take electronics. Like we said, now we'll have to make cell phones in India. There is a concerted effort that we have to bring cell phones in India. So why can't we bring now, next 3 years is going to be electronics focus on India. Let's bring everything on bringing electronics into the company. So it has to be a concerted effort. And if we do, I think then we can do a lot of reduction, either from China or any other place. We can be a value add into the value chain.
Anil, I'll come to you on the same subject. We have seen that in the last few months, or we have been trying, how can India emerge as an option to the world as a manufacturing or a hub for automotive industry? We always target that, can India be a substitute to China in any which ways, any possible pockets that you assess, and what the ecosystem should do to strengthen itself as an alternative to China? Is there a possibility you see there?
See, I mean, there are two aspects to when you have to look into being a global player in any arena. One is the competence, and another is the capacity. Yeah. So the competence as well as the capacity, which means volumes, which will help you to manage effectively and efficiently to stay competitive. These are the two aspects. And looking back into some of the aspects, let's start with the software. I think we all talked about it. India has such a huge advantage. I mean, yes, the Indian companies are not so much in this game, but there is a lot of aspect. Look into, I mean, whether it is Contis of the world or the Bosches of the world, we all have huge technical centers in India to take advantage of competencies, but also the cost part of it. I think it started as more like on the cost perspective, but very soon people realized that, you know, the things can be upgraded. And now, at least in Continental, we are covering all the aspect of connected, shared, electrified, and autonomous part of it. I mean, we are moved from doing the software testing to become a very integral part. And in many aspects, the teams in Bangalore are taking the lead on the global project. Yeah. So that's an example. Coming back to the particular parts and all, and I'm again coming back to my topic in terms of we need to look for the low hanging fruits here. Yeah. And clearly, urban mobility, which is in a form of shared one, is an easy thing, because rather than complaining and to say how we could build and how we could lower these hurdles, look where we could do. And again, even if you are having an electric two-wheeler or three-wheeler, they still use lithium ion cell. Of course, it is on a different voltage level, but it is a lithium ion cell is a lithium ion cell. And as you bring how to say, the volumes, it becomes, I would say that the numbers will then justify that one or the other player to start investing in the lithium ions. And there, again, there are so many chemistries. I don't know, I mean, recently, if you're following the news in China, people have already said that this LFP, the lithium iron phosphate, is a dying technology. It is only for the commercial vehicle because of the energy density and so on and so forth. But see, now Tesla has decided to launch Model 3 in China with a lithium iron phosphate. So there has been a lot of advancement. And again, when it comes to the electrified three-wheelers or maybe an urban city shared vehicle, there are things which you could do much easier. Once the volume started to come, you don't have to really look for an NMC 811 or solid state cell. And again, it's not always about cell part of it, because if you look into other countries as well, look into Europe. Europe has so far, I mean, Eastern Europe, yes, we have now LGs and the SKs of the world starting to put the cell manufacturing. But so far, they are doing the assembly. The anode and cathode materials are still being imported either out of China or out of Korea. So at the end of the day, for players, it's always about the volume game. So in India, rather than complaining, the government has to give both the financial help as well as the regulatory push, and the industry players have to really look for it where it's easy to get started. And I think that's what gets the ball rolling.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. It was a really insightful discussion. Thank you so much for giving complete view of the entire value chain and where we need to work. I'll just quickly like to sum up what has come out of this panel discussion. Sorry, because of time constraint, we were not able to take the audience questions, but I would request the audience to put their questions in the chat box. Our speakers will be available to take them, and they will answer you personally. So the outcome of this, or the key points from this panel discussions, are as follows. We have to pick our battles. It's not necessarily that if we do not have the ability to build cell right now, then why do we only talk about cells? We can look beyond it. We can look for power, look around power electronics, mechatronics. How can we leverage that? Software is a big advantage for India. How can we leverage that? How can we become a formidable force there? If we talk about the segment, vehicle segment, three-wheeler, traditionally India has been one of the largest. We have to become a global player in three-wheeler space. So we always try to find out a thing or a situation to blame on. When we talk about R&D or development, we always say that the cost competitiveness. But mind you, I'll tell you, many of the big OEMs are making better profitability in India than outside India. So you have to think, is that a constraint? Then you have to bring together academia, you have to bring together the industry, you have to find and search for the people or the available resources, as Mr. Babu also mentioned. So these are some key point that has been raised. Why we can't go in the full volume because of the capacity. India has still limited number of volume in various segments. So how we have to take that in mind and we have to deal accordingly. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining ETAuto EV Conclave. Stay tuned. Coming up next, and even more exciting sessions are there. Stay tuned at ETAuto Virtual EV Conclave. Put your questions in the chat box. Thank you so much once again.